On today's Locked On Jayhawks, KU takes on Oklahoma State in Allen Fieldhouse. We preview the game.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can hear me as well Monday through Friday from 3 to 6 p.m. on KLWN in Lawrence with Rock Chalk Sports Talk. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. Free and available anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the action. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, it's another preview, KU Oklahoma State on a Tuesday night in Allen Fieldhouse in Lawrence, 8 o'clock tip. 6:30 pregame on KLWN and 105.9 KISS. Before we get into the game, the Oklahoma State scouting report, storylines, what happened in the last meeting, matchups of the game, and Hawks to Soar. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So Kansas taking on Oklahoma State and trying to, it's just been choppy. I mean, we've used the term bounce back before in one of these game previews, and that becomes the case once again in this one. Kansas trying to bounce back again. Now, ideally, you would like to see things start getting rolling where Kansas has a winning streak, where they're trying to extend a winning streak, where they're not having to bounce back, where they're not having to, earn a victory after a loss, specifically on the road. But you really do have to protect home court now. That you already have 3 road losses and you still have to play in some really difficult environments on the road to come, right? You play at Texas Tech. Lubbock is a very difficult place to play, and they're in first place right now in the Big 12. You still have to play at Houston, who's been one of the best teams in the entire country. At Kansas State, that's an environment that gets up when you play them in Manhattan. At Baylor, right? There's going to be a lot of still tough road games that Kansas has to play here to where you have to basically hold court at home. You have to hold serve at home, and that's going to be easier said than done this week, more so with the second game against Houston on Saturday. But it kind of starts here, and you do have to take care of your gimmies, so to speak, and that's kind of what this feels like. Now, KU is looking for a sweep here over Oklahoma State. What happened in that first meeting in Stillwater? It was KU's best road game of the season. They have 2 road wins so far, Oklahoma State and Indiana, but Indiana hasn't been that good, and KU kind of had to limp away from that game. This was the one game where they just were by far the better team. They won 90-66 in Stillwater. Johnny Furphy, that was kind of a breakout moment for him. He had been starting for a little bit before for a few games, but he had 15 points in the first half, and it was really the start of this nice run that Johnny Furphy's on. Kevin McCullar had 18 points. KJ Adams had 16. Hunter Dickinson had 21 points. He was dominant on the inside, and DeJuan Harris even scored 11. So you got big production from all of your starting 5. And Kansas overall shot 69% on 2-point shots in that game. They had 7 blocks, so very good block total there. They had 10 more assists than Oklahoma State had. They had over 20 of them as a team. They had 3 less turnovers than Oklahoma State had, and a better offensive and defensive rebounding rate. So basically Kansas just, won in every category, and they were just the better team all around. But the other storyline here is maybe this is your last chance to breathe, so to speak. Now, I guess still at the end of the day, you can't take anything for granted. And still, with Oklahoma State being a team who, will fire up a lot of 3-point shots, maybe they can make it even closer than you expect. Maybe they can pull an upset that you don't quite expect. Some of the recent games have been very close scores that realistically anything in the Big 12 at this point can happen. But this feels like your one kind of, this is a game that you should win going away, or this is a game that you shouldn't have to sweat down the maybe at the under 4-minute timeout. It feels like this is the last maybe real opportunity that you expect that going into a game. Now, there will probably be a game that maybe you expect to be a close game, or you're playing a really good opponent over the last half of the season, of the last half of Big 12 play, that maybe you just blow them out and it was kind of one of your best games of the season. That will probably happen. But this is the last one you expected, because after this, it's versus Houston. That's a game you're going to be underdogs in. You're at Kansas State. Right now, KenPom has that as a 2-point game. Home against Baylor. That's a 3-point game on KenPom. At Texas Tech, at Oklahoma. Those are games that you're projected to lose by 1 on KenPom. Texas at home. That's a 7-point game. So that would be the next closest to this. BYU at home. That's projected to be a 1-point game. At Baylor, at Houston, both projected to be losses on KenPom, and home against Kansas State, that one up to 9 points. So those are all single-digit win projections or less, or losses for KU. So this is really your last chance to kind of breathe and have one of those performances that maybe you can dig a little bit deeper into the bench. And that is maybe a little bit concerning that you're about to get to that hard part where the bench won't be given as many liberties if you are in all close games, which a lot of them have been lately, but they haven't really progressed from where they were from at the beginning of the season. For the Oklahoma State scouting report, they are ranked outside of the top 100, currently 118th on KenPom. They are 9-11 overall, just 1-6 for the start of Big 12 play. We went over some of this stuff in our Kansas-Oklahoma State preview from a few weeks ago, so I don't want to reiterate everything, and thank you to every dares tuning into that. But just as a reminder, some of their non-con, they didn't play like the most difficult non-con in the world. They had a bunch of wins against teams ranked outside the top 170. Really, the games that they challenged themselves the most in were St. Bonaventure, who's ranked 82nd. That was a 2-point loss. Notre Dame, who's ranked 164th. That was a 2-point loss in overtime. Creighton, who's ranked in the top 15, 14-point loss, and that was a home game for them. And then at Southern Illinois, who's ranked 108th, that was a 2-point loss. And so far in conference play, they did have a close home loss in overtime to Baylor, and then had 2 blowout losses on the road before they played Kansas and got blown out at home. Since then, their 3 games in Big 12 play, it was a 70-66 loss at Kansas State, so a close loss on the road, then a 74-69 loss at home to TCU. They've been better at home than on the road, as most teams are, and has been pretty much the case in the Big 12. And then they got a 70-66 home win against West Virginia. So on its own, you could say they're playing a little bit better ball right now. They've had close losses since the Kansas loss. They even had a win in there, and they beat a team that beat Kansas as part of those last couple of weeks of play. For teams that KU has already played, when I go through some of these, we're just going to go through Big 12 only numbers as opposed to some of the overall, and we're starting to get more in Big 12 play, and I think that's more pertinent anyway. So what Oklahoma State does well? Well, they get to the free throw line a ton. They actually have the second best rate of free throw attempt per field goal attempt, meaning, per shot, they're getting to the free throw line a lot, which is interesting because they're taking a lot of 3-point shots, and usually those things don't correlate. They're second in 3-point attempt per field goal attempt. So they do they shoot a lot of threes, but they still find a way to get to the free throw line. They've also been good at avoiding fouls at the other end, which is also interesting because they've been the best team in the Big 12 at avoiding 3-point shot attempts from the opposition. Not necessarily 3-point percentage, but 3-point shots from the opposition. And part of that, I think, is just teams can feast on the inside against them. We'll get to that in a second. But they have the 3rd best rate in the Big 12 of avoiding sending teams to the free throw line. So they do typically win some numbers in terms of the free throw shooting, just the pure volume of the amount they're getting to. They've been top half in the conference at 2-point offense. They're ranking 7th of the 14 teams right now, 50.8%. So they've been solid there. And they have a top 2 defensive rebounding rate. So really good defensive rebounding team for Oklahoma State. But what they haven't done well so far in conference play, they are only 13th on offense. They are only 14th on defensive efficiency. So obviously they've struggled, and this is one of the bottom 2 teams in the Big 12. They were the worst until they beat West Virginia. I still think West Virginia is better. Obviously, that game was in Stillwater, but you could make the argument because they beat them that maybe West Virginia is the last, and this is the 13th best team. But offensively, they have been last in offensive rebounding rate, so they haven't gotten extra possessions there. They have been bottom 4 in 3-point percentage at just 31%, and bottom 4 in free throw percentage. Defensively, they are bottom 2 in turnover rate. They're bottom 2 in 2-point defense, block rate, non-steal turnover rate, and effective field goal percentage defense. So the defense has really, really struggled for Oklahoma State. And overall, as you'd imagine, with a record of 1-6 in conference play, things have not gone super well. A reminder about the personnel for them. The players to watch are point guard Javon Small. He's a transfer who had a really good non-con. Some of the conference numbers have dipped a bit, but he's still averaging about 14 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists per game, basically on 42, 41, 85 splits. So really, really good shooter. He can get hot at any moment. KU did a pretty good job containing him last game. Bryce Thompson, who will play the 2 and the 3 for them. He averages 12 points per game. Former Kansas player, former 5-star. He is shooting 35% from 3 so far this season. So he's a good shooter in what he has done. And then they're 2 big men, both freshmen, but they've had pretty solid seasons so far. Eric Daly will play the 4 and the 5. He mostly played the 5 last time these 2 teams met. He's averaging 10 points, 5 rebounds, and 2 assists on over 50% from the floor. Can shoot it a little bit. Percentages are in the mid-20s, but he has shown the ability to stretch out. And then 6'11", 245 center, who is a load, Brandon Garrison, also a freshman. He finishes well inside. He doesn't really have much of the stretch-out game. He's been a good shot blocker. That's a freshman front court that could be really good in a year or 2 from now and could be one of the better ones in the Big 12. Right now, you're seeing potential and flash, but there's still certain things there. Actually, interestingly enough, those are Oklahoma State's 2 best defenders by defensive BPR, but what's interesting is they give up a lot of stuff on the inside. So I don't know if that just tells you that it's about guards giving up penetration at the other end. Let's get on to our matchups of the game and then finish with Hawks to Soar on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. First, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, got to go with the wings, and placing some super bets. You can get in on just the team to win it. You can be, traditionalist, money line. You can go with the spread, the over-under. You can get some of the cool player props, like who's going to score a touchdown, how many points are going to be scored by one specific team, first touchdown score, over-under passing yards. And new customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Matchups for Kansas versus Oklahoma State. Number one is KU scoring inside. And this is something that should favor Kansas in a big way. One thing that's interesting, in games where Oklahoma State holds their opponents to below 45% on 2-point shots, they are 6-0. So obviously a very good record. Unfortunately for them, that's only happened 6 times, and they've played 20 games. And in the games where they haven't been able to hold opponents to below 45% on 2-point shots, they're just 3-11, right? And that tends to coincide with playing better opponents, obviously, right? And from the Kansas perspective, they have been held below 45% from 2 twice this year. Once was against UConn in a win. Once was against Marquette in a loss. Every other game they've got above it because that is one of their strengths. And that's the bad news for the Cowboys. Teams have shot 66.4% at the rim against them this season. And in Big 12 only games, that number is up to 75% at the rim. That is the worst in the country across college basketball and conference play. So whatever conference it is, whatever conference you're in, that's the worst. So teams have been able to feast inside. And I do think part of it is being able to take advantage of, freshman big men. But I do think a big part of it, too, is just penetration on their guards. Now, Kansas shot 68.9% from 2 against the Cowboys in that win in Stillwater. That was the worst game of the year for Oklahoma State in that category. Overall, Kansas averages 39 paint points per game per CBB Analytics. That's a number that's almost up to 40 in conference play. And those numbers are both in the top 5 percentile of college basketball. Kansas is going to want to pound it inside. They should be able to pound it inside. But if Oklahoma State is able to get them off their game a little bit, or maybe it's just one of those weird games where Kansas is missing layups, that would be one way for them to kind of stick around the game. Number 2 is Kansas dominating on the fast break and getting turnovers to lead to runouts, continuing the idea of getting in transition, getting on the fast break, those sorts of things. This was apparent of a difference in the first matchup. On paper, Kansas has been the better team overall in the year. Kansas in conference play is averaging about 13 fast break points per game. Oklahoma State's at about 7. So you have an edge there. KU also has the edge coming in on paper in points off turnovers per game. And in that first matchup, Kansas outscored the Cowboys 20-3 in fast break points with 17-point difference. They also outscored them 22-7 in points off of turnovers. And that doesn't always necessarily mean that, like, you could have had a turnover, then had a half court set, and you just hit a shot with 5 on the shot clock. So it's not always super corollary with the two, but there is a little bit of crossover between the two and what that means. And Oklahoma State's not a good transition team, or hasn't been nearly of what Kansas is. Get out in the open court and work your way downhill and get to the lane, get some easy shots. And Kansas was able to do that at a very high rate against Oklahoma State last game. So do it again. Number 3 is defending the 3 ball. This becomes a little bit more pertinent after some of KU's recent road struggles, and specifically after this last Saturday against Iowa State. So again, let's have the quick conversation about 3-point defense, because I'm sure you're not at all tired about having to talk about this, right? But as I've kind of said in some of the recent, there is a bit of luck that is involved with 3-point defense. Now, I don't want this to come across that I'm saying it is all luck, because I do believe there is some certain things that you can control a little bit. Over the long haul, if a team takes 100 3-point shots and all of them are contested, you might shoot 30%. Versus if they're wide open, you might shoot 40%. Unfortunately, in a 1-game sample size, both of those numbers could be the same. The unguarded one could actually be worse than the guarded ones. Like, for instance, Kevin McCullar, how many wide open threes did he miss in the Iowa State game? And how many contested threes did Iowa State hit in the game against Kansas, right? So in a 1-game sample, a 2-game sample, like those things can change over the long haul. If you do a better job contesting shots, though, over the course of the season, 3-point defense will be a little bit better, right? Certain things like switching can help with 3-point defense. Well, Kansas actually does that outside of switching to 5. Obviously, they play drop coverage with Hunter Dickinson, which is going to leave certain openings, especially depending on if they have a big man who can kind of stretch it and shoot a little bit. So, yeah, there are certain flaws in the Kansas defense or things that they could do better or things they need to tighten up. And there is a bit of it, too, where it is a little bit of luck. So it's this meshing of the two. And we'll see how that impacts this game. Oklahoma State is in the 0th percentile. I don't even know if 0th is the right way of saying it. But basically, they are the lowest at it in the country during league play for paint points per game. But they are in the 89th percentile overall on the season in terms of the amount of shots that they take per game coming from behind the arc. What does that tell you? They don't really feel like they're a great driving team or a great inside team. They're more so trying to take advantage on the outside and get hot from 3 in a specific game. And they shoot a lot of 3s. And the scare when you're playing a team like that, because they didn't shoot super well against kids the first meeting, is that, okay, what happens if they take a bunch of 3s and they make a bunch of 3s? Look at Iowa State, right? Now, Iowa State is a lot better at a lot of the other things that hypothetically, if Oklahoma State goes 14 of 30 from 3 in this game like Iowa State did, there's still a chance Kansas would win the game. A, you're playing at home. B, Iowa State's better at defense and rebounding and forcing turnovers and some of these other things that Oklahoma State is not. You could still find a way to win the game, but it would certainly make it a lot more challenging and make the game a lot closer than you would expect. But specifically, Oklahoma State ranks in the 97th percentile during conference-only play in terms of their 3-point volume in the corner. So you really got to watch out for the corner and guard the corner 3s because there are not many more teams in college basketball that are taking corner 3s than them. They've shot just 31% in Big 12 play, so they haven't been great shooting in Big 12 play despite the high volume. On the season, though, they're at 35.4%. So that tells you that maybe there's a little bit more there. Then again, they played a lot of bad opponents in non-con, so that easily could have got boosted up because they got more open shots against bad opponents. Also, though, going back to the last couple games where I've talked about, this team's only shooting this from 3, and then they shoot way better than that. Maybe that shouldn't even be a conversation here. But good news for Kansas is the scouting report is going to be different than the Iowa State one. Part of the scouting report, Bill Self said in the postgame, we were just willing to have Trey King. We had Hunter Dickinson switch on him. We were willing to have him shoot 3s because guess what? He had played 42 games at Iowa State coming into that game. He had shot, not made, he had shot 31 3-pointers. He was 7 of 31 in his first 42 games at Iowa State. So to expect him to shoot 7, maybe in your mind, you're like, okay, he'll shoot 2. Worst case, he goes 2 for 2. More realistically, he'll go 0 for 2 or 1 for 2. But for him to go 4 of 7, you don't expect that. And so that's one of those things where that was part of the scouting report. I don't know that that'll be Oklahoma State shoots so many 3s. It is part of the scouting report. It's going to be an emphasis for Kansas in this game. So that is the good news. Honestly, above all, I don't actually have this as a matchup, but you're the better team. You're playing at home. Just don't play stupid and you're going to be okay. You know what I mean? Don't give up a bunch of easy turnovers. Don't miss a bunch of layups and you're going to be fine. If that stuff does happen, that's how you let them into the game beyond kind of the 3-point shooting. Our player matchup is Kevin McCullar versus Bryce Thompson. Last matchup, Thompson had a really good game. He scored 20 points on 11 shots. He was 3 of 7 from 3, 7 of 8 at the foul line. Felt inconsequential, though. It felt like a lot of those points came in moments where the game was already out of reach. But still, over his last 3 games against Kansas, Bryce Thompson, the former Jayhawk, is averaging 20 points per game. And last year, when these two met in Allen Fieldhouse, he had 23 points. He was really good. Now, Kevin was awesome in the Oklahoma State game, too. Earlier this year, he had 18 points, 8 assists, 6 rebounds, so filling it up. He also had a steal, and he went 7 of 14 from the floor. He obviously had his probably worst game of the year against Iowa State, and some of them were just missed wide open 3s. I expect him to bounce back and have a good game here, and it's going to be imperative to do so because that's both an interesting matchup when you're talking about 2 transfers within the Big 12 going at each other, one a former Kansas guy going against his former team, but also a guy who can really get hot and has gotten hot against Kansas, and another guy in Kevin who's a really good defender. It becomes a very interesting matchup to watch in this one. Let's finish up Hawks to Soar, KU players we think can have big games on this episode of Locked on Jayhawks. First, we are brought to you by Jace Medical. I know we come to sports to escape some of the crazy realities of life, but can we just talk about preparing for real life here for a minute? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics and amoxicillin right now in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. It's scary because it can happen to anyone, and you don't want to be caught in that situation with your kids or with yourself where you're relying on a supply chain issue that keeps you from medication that you might need, and it's kind of a scary situation. The Jace case from Jace Medical is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, among others. This stuff could happen to any of us. Visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It'll be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jacemedical.com and use offer code Locked On to get $20 off your order with Jace. Finishing things up with Hawks to Soar, we're going to go with KJ Adams. So Oklahoma State gives up a lot of shots in the paint. Okay, that's somewhere that KJ Adams can work, but they also give up a lot of shots, more so at the paint than at the rim. You know, even though they're giving up a very high percentage at the rim, the biggest majority of number of shots has been in the paint, not at the rim. And that's where KJ Adams shoots a lot of those floaters and kind of short mid-range jump shots. Plus transition, something we talked about, favors Kansas. Fast break favors Kansas. KJ is an excellent transition player, whether it's leading the break, grabbing and going and dishing to somebody, or going out there in transition and throwing down a dunk. He had 16 points, 5 assists, 4 rebounds, and a block on 8 of 10 shooting in Stillwater. I think he has another big game for KU here. And then Hunter Dickinson. I mean, first of all, you're going up against, even though young, talented big men, you have a big matchup, I guess, nightmare for them here, because you're just bigger, you're older, you're more experienced, and Oklahoma State doesn't do a great job defending inside. Hunter Dickinson had 21 points in that game in Stillwater, and that's even with Kansas blowing them out, where, you know, the walk-ons get to come in for the final couple minutes of the game. So I think both your forwards inside should be able to have nice games for you. I do think if DeJuan Harris is hitting his layups, he has the ability to score double figures in this one too, because of the ability that Javon Small's not been a great defender, and sometimes they do give up too much guard penetration. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our podcast anywhere you get your show, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the action. See you next time with LOJ for an Oklahoma State Kansas recap.